That's my jam. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, let's start over here to our right-hand side. This is named Christopher Columbus Park, named after the famous Italian navigator who was credited with discovering America in 1492. Now, within Christopher Columbus Park, you see that wrought iron fence? There's a rose garden over there. It's called the Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy Rose Garden. There's 104 rose bushes over there, each in the honor of the year of the life of Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, the matriarch of the Kennedy family, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, F. Kennedy. It seems a little weird having a park. She's Irish. She was born and raised here in Boston. And it's in the middle of a park named after an Italian guy. Well, it's kind of ironic because the neighborhood she was born and raised in is over here to our left. It's called the North End. Now, often people mistakenly call it Boston's Little Italy. Only people not from here call it that. We call it the North End. Now, the North End is the oldest neighborhood in Boston. It was established Boston 1630, September 7th, 1630. And it's because we're so close to the water, as you see there to our right, how close we are. Now, over the years, you had more and more people coming in with different waves and nationalities at that. In the late 1800s, this was an Irish neighborhood. That's when Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy was born here. It wasn't until the 1920s the North End became an Italian neighborhood. It's only about 30% Italian today, still hangs on to this Italian feel. You can tell us by many shops and restaurants that do run throughout the North End. Unfortunately, we don't get to drive up into the streets of the North End any closer than we are right now. Instead, the roads are so narrow, dogs have to be trained to wag their tails vertically. You can see murky court there, how small it is. Now, up in the North End is a very small wooden house. And it's very famous, and this gentleman would probably be very upset if he knew that this is the house we knew him for. His name is Paul Revere. You might have heard of him. He's like this major guy that went through some countryside going, hey, the British are coming. You heard of him? Yeah. The house he lived in is in the North End. It's actually in a little area called North Square. It's about a block from Hanover Street, which is here to our left. If you walk up the street in this direction, about 6 minutes, you'll see, and you'll finally see a red brick line on the ground called the Freedom Trail. You can actually follow the foot right to his house on the, if you go to the left. If you go to the right, you go to the Old North Church. The Old North Church is where Paul Revere is said to go up to and hang 2 lanterns in the steeple, because you know that old thing that goes, 1 lantern if by land, 2 if by sea. Yeah, sea. Sea being the Charles River, which is over here to our right. But there's a little misconception on that. Paul Revere didn't actually hang the lanterns. There was this other guy named Robert Newman. He was the one that went up to the steeple and hung the 2 lanterns in the steeple. And when he was coming back, well, Paul Revere had run down to the countryside after telling him. And Robert Newman had come down to the base of the steeple. There was a couple of British soldiers waiting in the church for him. Yeah, they were probably going to arrest him. Yeah, because we were rebels. We were technically bad. We weren't patriots at the time. We were rebels. So the British soldiers chased Robert Newman around the church. He crashes through the window and he escapes, narrowly, barely. But if you look to our left, you see that tall white steeple at the top of the street, Henchman Street there. It's 197 feet tall. It's an unobstructed view of the North End, and nothing will or can be built taller than it because we have laws protecting it from doing so. Now, while Robert Newman was doing all that, Paul Revere, he runs down to the riverbank, jumps in a boat. He meets up with a guy named Deacon Larkin, who gives Paul Revere his fastest horse. And Paul Revere leaves heading out to Lexington, Concord. Now, while this was all going on, there was a second guy named William Dawes. William Dawes leaves through what's called the neck of Boston. See, at the time, Boston was only 1.2 square miles, which isn't very big, right? And there was a skinny piece of land called the neck. It was about as big as the street we sit on. And it was heavily guarded by British soldiers. William Dawes was able to sneak past these British soldiers by pretending he was drunk. They're like, oh, it's all drunk, William. Leave him alone, let him go. Not knowing he had a horse on the other side, where he then went off the countryside, also warning people of the British movement. Now, William Dawes showed up into Lexington about a half hour after Paul Revere. And while they were there, they met up with another guy named Sam Prescott, and the 3 men took off to Concord. Out of the 3 men, only one of them made it there. And that was Sam Prescott. Now, then the next morning, April 19th, 1775, the other thing about that poem is they did not run through the countryside screaming out at the top of their lungs, the British are coming! Nope, because if they did that, the British would know the British were coming, right? So what they did do is they went up to certain people's homes, they knocked on the doors, and they were like, hey, the regulars are out. And then the man of the house would then hurry up, grab his pants, grab his gun, jump on his horse, and he'd go to his neighbors and go, hey, the regulars are out. And the man of the house would then hurry up, grab his pants, grab his gun, jump on his horse. You get to the theme here. It said upwards of 500 men did participate in the Midnight Ride, not just Paul Revere, or even William Jones or Sam Prescott. It was up to 500 men. Now, what happened out in Lexington and Concord was like a scrimmage. It was an encounter, but it wasn't like the first battle. The first battle actually took place over here in Charlestown. We're leaving downtown Boston, North End, West End neighborhood, and we're crossing the Charles River just like Paul Revere did, but he didn't get stuck in traffic. And here in Charlestown, when the Puritans settled here, they tried to settle on this side of the river. They thought this would be better suited, they could protect it better, but there was no fresh water, it was brackish, so mixing the salt water and the fresh water. So they ended up going over to the North End, what is now known as the North End today. It wasn't until years later they were able to figure it out and make it work. The British soldiers attempted to take the hill 3 times. First 2 times we pushed them back, woohoo! But it was that third attempt we had to turn and run. We had to let the soldiers take the hill because we ran out of ammunition. So we have a monument in honor of battle we lost. And we're very proud of it too. There's a whole big parade, happens in June, and it's like 4 hours of parade. It's awesome. But over here to our left, you see that tall masted ship? That's the USS Constitution. This is also along the Freedom Trail. This is actually the only thing along the Freedom Trail that has absolutely nothing to do with the Revolution. It wasn't built yet. It wasn't commissioned until 1797 after the Revolution had ended. Unfortunately, it is closed currently to the public. You can still get up close and get a selfie with it. The museum, though, USS Constitution Museum, will be... I think it's opening next weekend, so it'll be soon. But the USS Constitution Museum there is built back in 1797 by our second president, John Adams. Built across the harbor, what is now known as Coast Guard Base, with 5 others just like her. She's the last remaining of 6. And she does have the nickname Old Ironsides. Now she gets this nickname during the War of 1812 in a battle against the HMS Guerriere off the coast of Nova Scotia. This was her quickest battle. She sunk the HMS Guerriere in 35 minutes. Now during this battle, one of the sailors had noticed the cannonballs bouncing off the sides, and that's when they proclaimed, "Huzzah! Her sides have been iron!" Of course they're not, but that's how she gets the nickname, and it's stuck with her all these years. Her sides are made of 17-inch, 21-inch live Georgian oak. And to this day, she does remain undefeated. She's never been occupied by another country. She's never been overtaken by pirates. And she still wins battles today. Alright, so it's not the same type of battles back in the day. But about 10 years ago, so the USS Constitution has a tradition that every evening it shoots off a cannon, signifying the end of the day. At sunset. Sunset changes throughout the day. Well, you see these condos we've been passing in the area? Ladies and gentlemen, you see that big, beautiful bridge? That is the Leonard P. Stake of Bunker Hill Bridge. The crown jewel of the big dig projects here in the city. The columns are designed to look like the Bunker Hill Monument. And the cables coming off look like sails, representing Boston sailing history. Also here to our right, the Colonel Richard Gridley locks. Colonel Richard Gridley was one of the engineers of the Battle of Bunker Hill, the locks up the boats get from the harbor to the river and back again. Also up here to our right, you have the TD Garden, home to the 6-time Stanley Cup champions, the Boston Bruins, and the 17-time champions, the Boston Celtics. Yeah, they haven't been doing so much lately, so Okay, that's to our left. You see that silver building with the colorful windows? That piece of property back in 1917 had been owned by the Purity Distillery Company. And they purchased the land to have a tank built. which is stood 50 feet high, 90 feet wide, and held 2.3 million gallons of molasses. They used it as a sugar substitute in rum. Now the tank had stood there through hot summers and cold winters for like 2 years. Because it was on a warm day, like today. January 15th of 1919, all of a sudden, that tank rips open. And it sent a 15-foot wave of molasses moving at 30 miles per hour. And the West End, that was one of the original neighborhoods, but it's a very good example of what not to do during urban redevelopment. The city wanted this land, and they obtained it through what's called eminent domain. And they had done this by not sending in any garbage trucks into the area for like 2 weeks.
Wow.
And this one they used to pick it up every day. At the end of the 2 weeks, they sent in a city inspector, who now declares the area a slum. The city took the land from the people, promising to rebuild low-cost housing and apartments. They did not. They had built high-cost apartments and condos in government federal buildings. Now today, because of all of this, though, we do have laws in Boston for various reasons, but this was a good one. They're not allowed to ever do that type of thing ever again. And I'll tell you though, the city did eventually formally apologize for what had happened. In November 8th, here to our left, you have Faneuil Hall, built back in 1742 by a wealthy French guy named Peter Faneuil. Peter had decided he wanted a marketplace built right on the waterfront. That's where the waterfront was in 1742. 2 months after he passed away, though, 2 months after it was completed, he passed away. And in his will, he donates the building to the city with one condition, that it always and forever remain open to the public, except during a pandemic. So it's not open at the moment. But it is an awesome building. I mean, they had many meetings there leading up to the Revolution. Many of the Sons of Liberty, they were Masons. So were the British soldiers, British officers. They were Masons. So you couldn't have a meeting back then. The colonists couldn't have any meetings without having permission. So they would go to the British officers and say, hey, buddy, we're going to have a Masons meeting tonight. You want to join us? And they're like, no, that's okay. And they would talk about the Revolution. Now, coming up here to our front right, you see the brick building with what's that thing in the front? The balcony. This brick building, and this is called the Old State House. We do have a new State House. We'll see in a few minutes. But this is the old one. It was built back in 1713 on the waterfront. Yeah, Boston's about 75% man-made land. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, a lot over there, even more over there. And then we also have in neighborhoods that were annexed into Boston. So when it was started, it went from 1.2 square miles to 48.4 square miles. That's huge. That's just land. You add in the water, it almost doubles. Now, but this is where the waterfront, there was a wharf that ran about 2,000 feet out to into Boston Harbor. Actually, at the other end of this wharf, basically, down toward the left, is where you guys started the tour with me. Now, the city government sat here until 1797 when it moved up to its current location. But in front of the building, and on the front of the balcony here on the ground, is a circle of granite pavers. And that marks the location where the Boston Massacre happened, on March 5th of 1770. When a group of colonists had chased a group of British soldiers to the front of the old State House. When a crowd had then formed and the British drew their weapons, someone in the crowd had heard a bell ring, which in that day meant one of two things: that it was Sunday and church was in session, or there was a fire somewhere in town. It was not Sunday. Someone in the crowd had yelled out fire. The soldiers took this as their cue to shoot upon the crowds. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists were dead and many more injured. Samuel Adams was the one that called it a bloody massacre, and that's how it became known as the Boston Massacre. Now, Sam Adams always seemed to know the right words to say to get the people rallied behind him, but it was his cousin, John Adams, for later became our second president, he defended those soldiers during trial. He believed everybody deserved proper representation and fair trial, and nobody else would represent them. John was able to get all except one of the soldiers be found not guilty. It was a mistake. It was never supposed to happen. Now, up here to our front right, you see the golden teapot? We've got the golden teapot. That is, it sits above Starbucks, so often gets confused as a coffee pot or as a piece of advertisement for Starbucks. It is neither. It is a coffee pot, and it was put up here in this area in the 1800s by the Oriental Tea Company. And when it is steaming, you can't always see, obviously it depends on the temperatures and stuff, but it is always steaming. And when they put it up here, they held a contest to see on who could guess on how much liquids it holds. And it is printed on black on the outside there. It holds 227 gallons, 2 quarts, 1 pint, and 3 gills, which is equivalent to like a shot glass. Alright, so coming up here to our left, we have the King's Chapel burial ground. This is the oldest burial ground in the city. Records here date back to 1630. Oldest gravestone dates back to 1658. Mary Shilton is buried in here. She was the first woman to step off the Mayflower. So is John Winthrop, the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Also here to our left, the King's Chapel. It is the oldest church in Boston, established back in 1630. Now that's not right. 1686. It was established in 1686 because it was a church for the British soldiers and the Church of England. And the whole reason the Puritans was leaving England was to get away from the Church of England. So they wanted to start their own. They showed up, British soldiers started showing up here, and there was no place for them to go to church. And they're like, hey, we're going to build it right next to your burial ground. And they were like, no, you can't do that. Can't tell a British soldier no. Somebody built one in there overnight, built a small wooden church. When they got kind of crowded, they built a small stone one around it so that they wouldn't miss any masses. When the stone one was complete, they opened the windows and threw the wood and went out. Here to our right, we do have the Granary burial ground. This is the third oldest burial ground in the city. The records here date back to 1660. And buried in here, you'll find 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence. You have Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Robert Treat Paine. Now, Massachusetts does have another delegate that signed the Declaration of Independence. That was John Adams. He's actually buried in his hometown of Quincy, Massachusetts, just outside of the city, just south of here. Now, also buried in here are the 5 victims of the Boston Massacre and that of a guy named Paul Revere. His is dead in the middle of the back there. But you see the big one in the middle? It says Franklin on it. I'll give you one hint on who's buried there. Benjamin Franklin is not. His parents are. Ben was born here in Boston back in 1706. He went to the very first public school in America, Boston Latin, 1634 was constructed. 1635 it was constructed. But he drops out at the age of 14 to go work for his brother. But his brother was a horrible boss, and he was worse on him than anybody else. So Ben runs away. He goes down to New York City, where he sees an ad in the newspaper for an apprenticeship for a print shop in Philadelphia, and that's where he's been ever since. He's doing well. He's just a little stiff. Now, up here to our front right, we do have the Boston Common. It's the oldest public park in the United States. That was public land, 1634. Now, on the corner of the park, you can see to our front right, but you'll get another view of it when I make the turn here, is the Park Street T Station, or subway station, or MBTA. We call it T. It's for the red line and the green line. This T station is the oldest subway station in America. We have the oldest subway system in the United States. Actually, in all of the Western Hemisphere, it's the 4th oldest in the entire world. Now, back in the day, today it costs like $2, almost $3 to ride around the subway. But back in the 1950s, it was only about 5 cents to get on. Now, one day they decided to change it and it cost another 5 cents to get back on. No, 5 cents to get on, 5 cents to get off. In purposes of this, there was a song written about it, about a guy named Charlie.
Well, let me tell you the story of a man named Charlie on a tragic, fateful day. He protects his pockets, gets his wife and family went to ride on the MTA. But did he ever return? No, he never returned. And his lady is still unlearned. He may ride forever in the streets of Boston, the man will never return.
Now, some of you guys know that song. If you ever decide to take our subway, they will give you a Charlie ticket in order to get on it. And it's in honor of him. Make sure you never have his fate. Now, this is the top of Beacon Hill. We do here to our left. This is actually the back of our new state house. This was an additional part. You would have seen we'll see it again too after we come back from our one stop. Big gold dome building there. They expanded it in 3 different ways. Straight back first, as Massachusetts became more populated. Sorry. Sometimes I kind of be quiet to focus more on my driving. You know, safety first, right? Now, at the end of the hill here,
driving safety first.
this area here, today it's known as Government Center. There's all types of government buildings, federal, city, state, everything's just here, mostly. And but up until the 1950s, this was known as Old Scully Square. And Old Scully Square had been known around the world for its bars, pubs, restaurants, theaters, tattoo parlors, and burlesque theaters. Sales and soldiers would come here to relax and have a good time, but during those 50s and 60s, during the urban redevelopment years, they tore it all down. They said it was corrupted. So in this place, they built up Government Center. Think about that. Over here to our right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Hurley State Services Building. I want you to notice the delicate grooved effect you see on the outside. It's on the inside as well. This was built during those urban redevelopment years in the 50s. This style of architecture is called brutal-esque. You heard that correctly. Brutal-esque. We have several designs, buildings like this in this design in Boston. That's not even the best representation we have of it. But that grooved effect was so expensive, they had to stop construction on the building. Today the building still remains unfinished. It has stairways that go nowhere, doorways that go into walls. Anybody? Again, government building. Anyone? Yeah. Just running with it there. Now, Massachusetts, Boston, sorry. Okay, we're a pretty small, large city. Our population is less than 700,000. We have less than 50 square acres of land. But we have some pretty big industries that are at the top there. We have finances, we have medicine, education, and my favorite, tourism. Now, medicine though, we have over 20 hospitals in our little big city. Some of them are the top hospitals in the country. We even have one of the top hospitals in the world. That's over here to our right. Everything you're looking at. It's called the Massachusetts General Hospital, also known as the MGH, because we love to name things really long and then we abbreviate them. Oh yeah. I mean, just try saying Massachusetts. Nobody, if you live and born was raised here in Massachusetts, you never say Massachusetts unless you're a tour guide. You just say Mass. Now, down the street, MGH is home to many medical firsts throughout the years, and they still do things today. But one of them is down the street here. You'll see a building, beautiful granite building with some columns out front. That's called the Ether Dome. That's actually where they used ether for the first time when performing surgery. Prior to that, they used Jack Daniels, exactly. Jack Daniels, or nothing. Many people didn't survive because of the pain. Now, what happened when you gave them a little bit of ether, it would knock you out. You'd have the greatest sleep of your life. They could do the surgery, and the most important part, you woke up. And so that's when they performed it for. It was actually a dental procedure they did it first. But they call it a theater. It's a little, their slogan will captivate you. They really run to our theme is there to our right, by the way. They turned the old drunk tank into a bar. It's called the Alibi. The house white wine is called Innocent, while the red, no, that's guilty. That just feels wrong. I don't know what I would feel more wrong ordering. May I have a glass of guilty, or may I have a glass of innocent? Alright, so this bridge off to our right-hand side, ladies and gentlemen, this is called the Longfellow Bridge. It was named after Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He wrote the poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, right? But when he was alive, one of his most famous poems was called The Bridge. And it was about the bridge. This is here prior to this one. When they replaced it with the current one in 1906, in honor of that poem and the poet, they named the bridge after him. Longfellow. Now, this street here is called Charles Street. We call it that because it used to be the riverbank. From here, everything to our right, out to that, today's riverbank, is landfill. But coming down Charles Street, it's like we're stepping back in time. This area is all protected by something called the Federal Protection Act. It basically says you can do whatever you want to the inside, outside has to stay the same. This came into play in the 1960s. But, because back in the 1800s, this was still all stores, and because people shopping on this street, many of them couldn't read, because they were the servants, the people that lived on Beacon Hill here off to our left. Shopkeepers would put their signs in the shape of items they sold, make it easier for them to find the goods they needed. So like Helen's Leather Shop, they sell boots. This green store to our left, they sell mermaids. The Charles Street Family Chiropractor, they sell backbones if you know someone that needs one. Some of my favorite signs along this street, you have the drugstore has the mortar and pestle, and the hardware store has a hammer, because it's hammer time. Oh. Too legit, too quick. Now, coming down Charles Street here, I also points out these gas lanterns. If you line Charles Street, Beacon Hill, and parts of the Back Bay, you may notice something a little strange about these gas lanterns on this nice, bright, beautiful, sunny day. They're on. These lanterns have been on for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, since the city found out it would be cheaper to leave them on than to pay somebody to light them every evening. That has been since 1912. Now they're protected, they have to stay on too. Trust me, the people in this neighborhood at Beacon Hill, it's okay. They pay for it. Beacon Hill is like the most expensive neighborhood in Boston. You have Lewisburg Square up there. Beautiful area, by the way. If you haven't just wandered the streets, it's gorgeous. There's Acorn Street. It's considered the most photographed street in Boston. It's got the original river stones. There's no cars, bicycles, anybody, so you can walk on it. That's it. Acorn Street, just up the road there. Speaking of just up the road, well, we do have the public garden over here to our left, ladies and gentlemen. You have the make-way for duckling statues over there. They look like they still have their knit hats on. They should be getting their spring bonnets soon. Make-way for ducklings written by Rob McCloskey back in 1941. You guys can go check that out with the public garden here. As well as the tan awnings, the wrought iron fence, the bull and finch pump, the inspiration location for a TV show known as Cheers. Yeah, Cheers. Now this is our one and only stop. You have about 15 minutes. Let me just finish squaring up here so I'm not.
See you later. Bye. Okay? Bye. Ciao.
So much so they based characters off them in the TV show. Now people started coming in Boston looking for the bar in that show, but all they kept finding was the Bull and Finch. So the owner of the restaurant, Tom Kershaw, he changed the name to the Bull and Finch. Said cheers. I feel like you guys all know the words.
Taking away the world today takes everything you got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away?
Ready, here we go.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name.
There you go.
And they're always glad you came. You wanna be where you can see struggles are all the same. You wanna be where everybody knows your name.
There you go. That was awesome.
Cheers.
I mean, I'll take that. That was pretty sweet right there. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, this neighborhood that we're traveling through, this is called the Back Bay. And this used to be exactly what the name suggests. It was a bay at the back of Boston. It was a very swampy area, and they used to do whatever you do when you have a swampy area. They throw garbage and sewage over here. Alright, so they weren't the most environmentally friendly people that we are today. But, see, back in the day, the Charles River, which is on the outside building to our right, was tidal. Now what that means, because it feeds the harbor, which is the ocean, it would go up and down with the tide. So the high tide would come into this area and the low tide would wash it out. So people would throw their garbage in sewage over here. Tide come in, wash it out. Down in sewage, tide come in. That was until 1812, when they built the Mill Dam, which runs underneath Beacon Street, where we are right now. This dam now prevented the tide to come off the Charles from coming to this area and washing it out. So you think people would, there's like park benches, trees growing in the middle. It was a church until the 1970s, when construction actually already played. It caught on fire. It gutted the building. The congregation did not have the money to rebuild, so they sold it to a developer who brought the front and the side of the building back to its original beauty, and then formed a series of condos around the rest of it. So today it is known as the Church Court Condos,